I'd like to go back to the past. If we look back to, let's say, around 2010, so almost 15 years ago, if you tried to, Geoffrey Hinton in 2010, the predictions that you made, where were you too optimistic, too pessimistic about the speed of progress?
So ask me about 2016 later.
Okay.
So I think if you had asked people, even fairly enthusiastic people who believed in neural nets, in 2010, where we would be now, they wouldn't have believed we'd have something like GPT-4. They would have said, no, in the next 14 years, you're not going to develop something that's an expert at everything. Not very good expert, but an expert at everything. You're not going to be able to have a system where you can just ask any question you like, some obscure question about British tax law, or some weird question about how you solve equations, and it's going to be able to give you a pretty good answer. An answer that's better than 99% of the population could give you. That's extraordinary, and we wouldn't have predicted that.
And so progress is happening faster than you anticipated.
Yes.
Can you share more? What's it like to experience that as one of the leading researchers in the space and watching it accelerate?
It's amazing, because back in the 80s, when Rumelhart reinvented backpropagation, he rediscovered it, and he and I worked together to use it for things. And we thought, to begin with, this is going to solve everything. We've got something that can just learn, and there doesn't seem to be any limits to it. And then it was very disappointing, and we didn't understand why it didn't work better. It was partly architectural things, and for about 30 years we used an input-output function that looked like this when we should have used one that looked like this. Just crazy. But it was mainly scale, and we just didn't understand that this whole idea would only really come into its own when you had a lot of connections and a lot of training data and a huge amount of compute. So we couldn't have done it back then. And if we'd said back then, yeah, but if we made one 1,000,000 times bigger and had 1,000,000 times more data, it'll really work, that would have just sounded like a pathetic excuse. But it turned out that was the truth.
That's fascinating. So one of the things that you and I talked about earlier is the underselling of what large language models do. If we use the term next word prediction, the experience that we have is that they could be reasoning, they could have a degree of intelligence. Can you share more about how that comes about?
So there's many people who say these things are just using statistical tricks, they don't really understand what they're saying, they're just using correlations. But if you ask those people, well, what's your model of how people understand? If they're symbolic AI people, their model is we have symbolic expressions and we manipulate them with symbolic rules, and that never worked that well. It didn't work nearly as well as the large language models. If you have cognitive scientists, they'll come up with a variety of explanations, but my initial tiny language model wasn't designed to do NLP, natural language processing. It was designed to show how people could learn the meanings of words. So it was a model of people, a very simplistic model. But the best model we have of how people understand sentences is these large language models. It's not like we have a different model of how people work and these work differently. The only good model of how people work that we have is like this. So I think they really do understand, and they understand in the same way as we do.
And these large language models might have that kind of embedded creativity already in them.
Yes, so many people say, these language models will do routine things, but people are creative. Well, if you take a standard test of creativity, I think the large language models now do better than 90% of people.
That's really
so the idea they're not creative is crazy. This is very relevant to the debate among artists and Silicon Valley about whether these AI models are just stealing the creations of artists. Obviously, to produce a work in a genre, you have to listen to a lot of music in that genre. But it's the same with a person. Whenever a person produces new music in a genre, they are stealing the works of previous people in just the same way the AI system is.